I found out. My cousin has been trying to steal my boyfriend by bending over in front of him, wearing nothing below and making sexual comments. But my aunt called me a liar and is making me move out of their house. For context, I, 24F, live with my aunt Sarah, 48F, and Uncle Mike, 51F, along with their daughter Emma, 20F, who is my cousin. My parents died in a car accident when I was 19, and Sarah and Mike took me in without hesitation. They've been incredibly supportive, helping me finish college and get on my feet. Emma and I have always had a complicated relationship though. Growing up, everyone always commented on how different we were. Emma has always been what people call naturally beautiful. She's 5'7", has long dark hair, green eyes, and what my grandmother used to call an hourglass figure. She never had to work for her appearance. She eats whatever she wants, doesn't exercise, and still looks like she could be in magazines. I'm shorter at 5'4", have brown hair that I spend hours styling, and I've worked out religiously since high school to maintain my athletic build. I meal prep every Sunday, count calories, and wake up at 5 a.m. for gym sessions before work. The contrast between us became more obvious when we hit our teens. Boys at school would ask me for Emma's number. At family gatherings, relatives would compare us, usually with comments about how Emma got the looks and I got the brains. Emma seemed to enjoy the attention, while I threw myself into academics and fitness to feel worthwhile. 8 months ago, I met Daniel, 26M, at a coffee shop near my office. He was reading a book I loved. We started talking, and I was immediately drawn to his kindness and intelligence. He works as a software engineer, volunteers at animal shelters on weekends, and treats service workers with genuine respect. He's also objectively attractive, tall, athletic from playing soccer twice a week, with the kind of smile that makes strangers trust him instantly. The first few months of our relationship were perfect. Daniel would pick me up from work with my favorite coffee, remember small details about my day, and made me laugh in ways I hadn't in years. When I introduced him to my family, everyone seemed to approve. Emma was polite but distant, which I actually preferred given our history. Everything changed about 4 months ago. Emma started joining us whenever Daniel came over. At first, it seemed innocent. She'd sit with us while we watched movies or hang around the kitchen when we cooked dinner together. But gradually, her behavior shifted in ways that made me uncomfortable. She began changing her clothes whenever Daniel arrived. Emma normally wore oversized hoodies and leggings around the house, but suddenly she was greeting him in tight tank tops without bras, short skirts, and crop tops that showed her stomach. When I mentioned this to her privately, she claimed she was just dressing more confidently lately and that I was reading too much into it. The clothing changes were just the beginning. Emma started positioning herself strategically whenever Daniel was around. During movie nights, she'd sit on the floor in front of the couch where we sat, wearing loose tops and bending forward frequently to reach snacks or adjust the volume. When Daniel walked through the kitchen, she'd suddenly need something from the bottom cabinet, bending over directly in his path. She'd drop things constantly, her phone, the TV remote, pens, always when he was nearby and always requiring her to bend down slowly to retrieve them. The worst part was how she sat when wearing skirts or shorts. During family dinners or movie nights, she'd position herself across from Daniel and sit with her legs spread wide. She made no effort to maintain modesty. I noticed Daniel looking at his plate more often during meals and scrolling through his phone more during movies. He was clearly trying to avoid looking in her direction. When I tried talking to Sarah about Emma's behavior, the conversation went nowhere. Sarah said Emma was just being friendly and that maybe I was feeling insecure. She said because Emma was younger and more outgoing. She suggested that if Daniel was looking at Emma, that reflected poorly on him, not on Emma. When I pressed further, Sarah got defensive and said I was creating drama where none existed. I attempted to discuss it with Emma directly, but she denied everything. She claimed she dressed the same way she always had and that I was imagining things because I was jealous. She said I'd always been jealous of her and that now I was projecting that onto my relationship with Daniel. My Uncle Mike seemed to notice something was off though. During family dinners, I caught him giving Emma sharp looks when she'd lean across the table unnecessarily or sit inappropriately. He never said anything directly, but his expression suggested he saw what I was seeing. The situation escalated 3 weeks ago when Sarah asked Daniel to help move Emma's dresser upstairs. Emma had been complaining about her room layout for weeks, and when Daniel offered to help, Sarah immediately took him up on it. As soon as they went upstairs, Emma changed into a sports bra and tiny shorts, claiming she didn't want to get her good clothes sweaty. I followed them upstairs a few minutes later and found Emma bending over the dresser, adjusting items inside the drawers while Daniel held the other end. She was moving slowly, arching her back, and making small talk about how strong he was. When she noticed me watching, she straightened up quickly and suggested they take a break. After they finished, Daniel seemed tense and distracted. He left earlier than usual, saying he had work to catch up on. When I walked him to his car, he seemed uncomfortable, but assured me everything was fine when I asked. The breaking point came yesterday evening. Emma had been out with friends and came home around 8 p.m. wearing a white sundress that was completely see-through in the right lighting. She walked into the living room where Daniel and I were watching TV, stood directly in front of the lamp and asked if we'd seen her phone charger. The backlight made the dress completely transparent, and she stood there for several minutes, moving slowly and checking different surfaces. Daniel immediately looked down at his hands and started fidgeting with his phone. I could see his jaw tense up. Emma continued the performance, walking around the room, bending to look under cushions, and stretching to check high shelves. Finally, she announced she found the charger in her room all along and disappeared upstairs. After she left, Daniel and I sat in silence for several minutes. He apologized, saying he felt uncomfortable and didn't know how to handle the situation without creating family drama for me. He said he'd been trying to ignore Emma's behavior, but it was becoming impossible to pretend nothing was happening. I told him I appreciated his honesty and that I'd been seeing the same things. We talked about how to address it without destroying my relationship with my aunt and uncle. They had done so much for for me. Daniel suggested we could spend more time at his apartment, but I pointed out that avoiding the problem wouldn't make it go away. Later that night, I heard Emma on the phone with one of her friends, laughing about how easy it was to make guys uncomfortable and how much fun she was having. She mentioned Daniel specifically, saying he was trying so hard to be respectful, but that she could tell he was affected. She talked about it like it was a game. This morning, Sarah mentioned that Daniel seemed tense lately and wondered if everything was okay with our relationship. When I tried to explain what had been happening, she interrupted me and said I was being dramatic. She accused me of trying to control what Emma wore and said I needed to trust my boyfriend more. I'm at a loss. Daniel has been nothing but respectful and honest with me throughout this situation. He's never encouraged Emma's behavior and has actively tried to minimize interaction with her, but living in this house is becoming unbearable. Emma seems to view this as entertainment. Sarah refuses to acknowledge the problem, and I'm starting to feel like I'm losing my mind. I love my aunt and uncle for everything they've done for me, but I can't continue living in an environment where my relationship is being treated like a joke. At the same time, I don't have many other options for housing right now, and leaving would mean walking away from the only family I have left. Has anyone dealt with something similar? Am I overreacting, or is this as inappropriate as it seems? I need advice on how to handle this without destroying my family relationships or my relationship with Daniel. Update 1. I posted 2 weeks ago about my cousin Emma trying to seduce my boyfriend Daniel while my aunt Sarah refused to acknowledge the problem. A lot has happened since then, and honestly, I'm not sure if things are better or worse now. First, thank you to everyone who commented on my original post. Reading your responses helped me realize I wasn't losing my mind, and that Emma's behavior was as inappropriate as I thought it was. Several people suggested having a united front with Daniel, so that's what we decided to do. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Last weekend, Sarah and Mike went out of town to visit Sarah's mother, leaving Emma and me alone in the house. Daniel was supposed to come over Saturday evening for dinner and a movie. I told him about the plan beforehand. We would address Emma's behavior directly if she tried anything. Saturday started normally enough. Emma spent most of the day in her room, and I used the time to meal prep and clean the house. When Daniel arrived around 6 p.m., Emma was still upstairs. We cooked dinner together and were setting the table when Emma finally came downstairs. She was wearing a black dress that was obviously too small for her. The neckline was so low that her bra was visible, and the dress barely covered her thighs when she sat down. She'd clearly spent time on her hair and makeup, despite the fact that we were just having a casual dinner at home. Emma joined us at the dining table and immediately began what I can only describe as a performance. She leaned forward constantly while eating, ensuring Daniel had a clear view down her dress. She asked him to pass items that were closer to me, requiring him to reach across the table. When she laughed at his responses to my questions, she threw her head back dramatically and touched his arm. About halfway through dinner, Daniel and I exchanged a look. He cleared his throat and said he wanted to talk about something that had been bothering him. Emma looked up with interest, probably expecting him to compliment her appearance or ask her personal questions. Instead, Daniel said he'd noticed some behavior lately that made him uncomfortable and that he wanted to address it directly rather than let it continue. Emma's expression shifted immediately. She asked what he meant, playing innocent. Daniel was direct but polite. He said he'd noticed her changing clothes when he arrived, positioning herself in ways that seemed designed to get his attention. He said she was creating situations that felt inappropriate given that I was his girlfriend and she was my family member. He said he respected her as my cousin, but needed the behavior to stop because it was affecting his relationship with me and his comfort level in the house. Emma's face went through several emotions: surprise, embarrassment, and then anger. She denied everything, saying Daniel was flattering himself if he thought she was interested in him. She said she dressed however she wanted in her own house, and that if he was looking at her inappropriately, that was his problem, not hers. I spoke up and said I'd also noticed the behavior and that it had been going on for months. I listed specific examples: the dresser incident, the see-through dress, the constant bending and positioning. Emma got defensive and accused me of being jealous and controlling. The conversation escalated quickly. Emma said I'd always been jealous of her, and that now I was trying to turn my boyfriend against her. She said she pitied Daniel for having such an insecure girlfriend, and that maybe if I was more confident, I wouldn't see threats everywhere. Daniel stood up and said he didn't want to hear me insulted in my own home. He said Emma's behavior had nothing to do with my confidence and everything to do with her choices. He told her that her actions were disrespectful to both of us and that he wouldn't tolerate it anymore. Emma stormed out of the room, slamming her bedroom door loud enough to shake the house. Daniel and I finished dinner in relative peace, and he stayed until late that evening. We both felt relieved to have finally addressed the situation directly. Sunday was tense. Emma barely spoke to either of us and spent most of the day in her room. When she did emerge, she was fully dressed in normal clothes and avoided eye contact with Daniel. I thought maybe the conversation had worked. Sarah and Mike returned Sunday evening, and Emma immediately went to them with her version of events. According to Emma, Daniel had accused her of inappropriate behavior, and I had supported him in attacking her. She said she felt uncomfortable and unsafe in her own home because of Daniel's accusations. Sarah was furious with me. She said I'd crossed a line by bringing Daniel into family business and that I'd humiliated Emma in her own house. She said Emma was just a young woman trying to express herself and that Daniel and I had made her feel dirty and ashamed for no reason. Mike was quieter but seemed troubled by the whole situation. He asked me privately what had happened, and I gave him the same explanation I'd given Emma. He listened without interrupting and said he'd talk to Sarah about it. The conversation between Mike and Sarah happened Monday evening after I got home from work. I could hear them arguing in their bedroom, though I couldn't make out specific words. Sarah's voice was raised, and Mike's responses were shorter and firmer than usual. Tuesday morning, Sarah barely spoke to me at breakfast. Emma sat between us at the table, creating a physical barrier. She made small talk with Sarah about her plans for the day. When Daniel Daniel texted asking if he should come over that evening. I told him to give it a few more days. The rest of the week was uncomfortable. Sarah made pointed comments about respecting family and not bringing outsiders into family conflicts. Emma played the victim, sighing dramatically whenever I entered a room and mentioning to Sarah how hurt she was by my accusations. Mike seemed caught in the middle. He was polite to me but didn't engage in longer conversations like he usually did. I could tell he was trying to keep peace in the house while processing everything that had happened. Friday evening, things came to a head again. I was in the kitchen making dinner when Emma came downstairs wearing normal clothes, jeans and a sweater. She approached me hesitantly and said she wanted to talk. Emma said she'd been thinking about what Daniel and I had said, and that maybe some of her behavior had been inappropriate. She said she hadn't realized how it looked from my perspective, and that she didn't want to cause problems in my relationship. I was surprised by the apology and told her I appreciated her acknowledging it. She said she'd been going through a difficult time and that maybe she'd been acting out without realizing it. She asked if we could start over and try to get along better. The conversation felt genuine, and I agreed to move forward. Emma asked if Daniel would be coming over for dinner, and I said yes. She promised to behave appropriately and said she understood my boundaries now. Daniel came over that evening, and Emma kept her word. She was polite but not overly friendly, wore appropriate clothing. She didn't engage in any of the behaviors that had caused problems before. The evening went smoothly, and I started to think maybe we'd resolved the issue. But yesterday, something happened that changed everything again. I came home from work early because I wasn't feeling well. I overheard Emma on the phone in her room. Her door was slightly open, and she was talking to one of her friends about the situation. Emma was laughing about how easy it had been to convince everyone that I was the problem. She said she'd played the victim perfectly and that Sarah was completely on her side now. She talked about how pathetic it was that I needed my boyfriend to fight my battles and how much fun it had been to watch me get upset. But the worst part was what she said next. Emma told her friend that she was just laying low for now, but that she wasn't done with Daniel. She said he was too attractive to give up on, and that she'd find subtler ways to get his attention once things calmed down. She talked about it like it was a challenge she was looking forward to. I stood outside her door listening to this conversation, and I realized that her apology had been completely fake. She hadn't learned anything or changed her behavior. She'd just gotten better at hiding it and manipulating the situation. Now I'm back where I started, except worse. Sarah thinks I'm the problem. Emma is playing victim while planning her next moves. I don't know who I can trust in this house anymore. Daniel still doesn't know about the phone conversation, and I'm not sure whether to tell him. I'm starting to think I need to find other living arrangements, but that would mean leaving the only family I have left. It would potentially destroy relationships that have supported me for years. At the same time, I can't keep living in a situation where my relationship is under constant attack and my family refuses to see what's happening. I don't know what my next move should be. Any advice would be appreciated. Exa update 2. It's been a month since my last update, and I wish I could say things have improved, but they've actually gotten much worse. The situation with Emma escalated in ways I never expected, and I've learned some things about my family that have changed everything. After I overheard Emma's phone conversation about continuing to pursue Daniel, I decided to keep that information to myself for a while and just observe her behavior. I wanted to see if she would actually follow through on her plans or if it was just talk. For about 2 weeks, Emma kept up the act of being apologetic and appropriate. When Daniel came over, she wore normal clothes and maintained respectful boundaries. She made small talk but didn't engage in the attention-seeking behaviors that had caused problems before. Sarah seemed pleased that we'd worked things out, and even Mike appeared more relaxed. But I was watching Emma carefully, and I started noticing subtle things. When Daniel wasn't looking directly at her, she'd position herself in his peripheral vision and make small movements designed to catch his attention. She'd stretch in ways that seemed casual, but were clearly calculated. She'd time her arrivals in rooms to coincide with moments when Daniel was alone, even briefly. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago during what should have been a routine family dinner. Sarah had invited her sister Lisa and Lisa's husband Tom over, along with their twin sons who are Emma's age. Daniel joined us, making it a full table of 8 people. Emma dressed appropriately for the dinner, a nice blouse and jeans, but I noticed she'd chosen a chair directly across from Daniel. Throughout the meal, she was charming and engaging with everyone, playing the perfect hostess and daughter. About an hour into dinner, Emma excused herself to use the bathroom. A few minutes later, Daniel got up to take a phone call from work. He's been dealing with a difficult project that requires him to be available even during personal time. I was helping Sarah clear the appetizer plates when I heard Emma's voice from the hallway, speaking to Daniel in a tone I'd never heard her use before. She was asking about his work, but her voice was softer and more intimate than her usual speaking voice. I paused in the kitchen doorway and could see them standing near the front door. Emma was standing much closer to Daniel than necessary, looking up at him with an expression that was unmistakably flirtatious. As he explained his work situation, she reached up and adjusted his collar, saying it had been crooked. Daniel stepped back immediately, but Emma closed the distance again, placing her hand on his chest and telling him he worked too hard. I was about to interrupt when Daniel firmly removed her hand and told her they should rejoin the family. Emma's expression shifted to something I can only describe as predatory. She said something I couldn't hear, but whatever it was made Daniel's face change completely. He looked shocked and uncomfortable. They returned to the dining room separately, with Emma arriving first and Daniel following a minute later. Emma resumed her role as the perfect family member, but Daniel was visibly shaken. He barely spoke for the rest of the evening and left as soon as it was polite to do so. After everyone went home, I asked Daniel what Emma had said to him in the hallway. He was reluctant to tell me at first, saying he didn't want to cause more family drama. When I pressed him, he finally admitted that Emma had made explicit comments about what she wanted to do with him and had suggested they meet somewhere private. I was furious, but Daniel asked me not to confront Emma immediately. He said he wanted to handle it himself first and that he was was worried about the impact on my living situation if things escalated further. The next morning, Daniel called Emma and told her explicitly that her behavior was inappropriate. He said any further advances would result in him avoiding the house entirely. Emma denied making any inappropriate comments and accused him of misunderstanding her friendly conversation. That evening, Emma approached me with tears in her eyes, saying Daniel had called her and been cruel to her for no reason. She said he'd accused her of saying things she never said and that she was hurt and confused by his hostility. She begged me to talk to him and find out why he was treating her so badly. I told Emma I knew exactly what she'd said to Daniel and that her act wasn't fooling anyone. Emma's tears stopped immediately, and her expression changed to something cold and calculating. She said I was pathetic for believing Daniel over family and that maybe I deserved whatever happened to my relationship. Sarah walked in during this exchange and heard only Emma's last comment. She demanded to know what was going on. Emma immediately began crying again, saying I was attacking her because Daniel had been inappropriate with her. Sarah's reaction was swift and furious. She said she was tired of me bringing my relationship problems into the house and making Emma uncomfortable. She said if I couldn't trust my boyfriend around my own family, maybe I needed to examine my relationship instead of blaming Emma. When I tried to explain what had actually happened, Sarah cut me off. She said Emma had already told her about Daniel's phone call and that she was disgusted by his behavior toward a younger family member. She said she was considering asking me to move out because the situation had become too disruptive for the household. Mike tried to mediate, but Sarah shut him down too. She said she'd made up her mind. She said she wouldn't have Emma feeling unsafe in her own home because of my boyfriend's inappropriate conduct. That night, I called Daniel and told him about Sarah's threat. We both realized that Emma had successfully manipulated the situation to make herself the victim. She was painting us as the aggressors. Daniel said he wouldn't come to the house anymore because his presence was clearly causing too many problems. The next 2 weeks were miserable. Sarah treated me with cold politeness. Emma acted like the wronged party. Mike seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation but unwilling to go against Sarah. I felt completely isolated in what was supposed to be my home. Then, last week, something happened that changed everything. Mike's brother Kevin came to visit from out of state. Kevin is 35, recently divorced, and staying in our guest room for a few days while he looked at job opportunities in our area. Kevin is attractive in a different way than Daniel, more rugged, with tattoos and a motorcycle. Within hours of his arrival, Emma was displaying all the same behaviors she'd used with Daniel. She changed into revealing clothes, positioned herself provocatively, and began seeking his attention constantly. But Kevin responded very differently than Daniel had. Instead of trying to be respectful and avoid looking, Kevin clearly enjoyed the attention. He made comments about Emma's appearance, engaged in flirtatious banter, and didn't seem concerned about appropriate boundaries. By the third day of Kevin's visit, Emma was spending most of her time with him. They'd disappear for hours, claiming to be showing him around town or helping him with job applications. Sarah seemed oblivious to what was happening, just happy that Emma was being helpful to family. Mike, however, noticed everything. I saw him watching Emma and Kevin with an expression of growing concern and disgust. On Kevin's last night, Mike asked to speak with me privately. Mike told me he'd seen Emma's behavior with Kevin and realized it was the same behavior I'd been describing with Daniel. He said he'd been trying to give Emma the benefit of the doubt because she was his daughter, but watching her with Kevin had opened his eyes. Mike apologized for not believing me sooner and said he understood now why Daniel had been uncomfortable. He said Emma's behavior was inappropriate regardless of how men responded to it, and he was ashamed that he'd let Sarah dismiss my concerns. Mike also revealed something that shocked me. He said Emma had been acting this way since high school. She was seeking attention from older men and creating drama with her female friends' boyfriends. He said Sarah had always made excuses for Emma's behavior, calling it normal teenage experimentation even when it caused serious problems. He told me about several incidents I'd never heard about. Emma pursuing married teachers, breaking up her friends' relationships. She was causing scenes at family gatherings with her inappropriate behavior toward male relatives and family friends. Mike said he'd tried to address it over the years, but Sarah always protected Emma and accused others of being jealous or judgmental. Mike said he was planning to have a serious conversation with Sarah about Emma's pattern of behavior. He said he wouldn't let me be driven out of the house because of it. He said Emma needed to face consequences for her actions instead of being enabled by Sarah's protection. The conversation between Mike and Sarah happened 2 nights ago, and it was explosive. I could hear Sarah screaming that Mike was attacking their daughter and that he was choosing outsiders over family. Mike's voice was calmer but firm, explaining that Emma's behavior was damaging relationships and that it needed to stop. Sarah accused Mike of being attracted to Emma himself and said his criticism of her was inappropriate and disgusting. The accusation was so outrageous that Mike didn't even respond to it, but I could hear him moving around the room, probably packing clothes. Mike slept in the guest room that night and left early the next morning. He texted me later saying he was staying at Kevin's hotel and that he needed time to think about his marriage. He said Sarah's accusation had crossed a line that he couldn't ignore. Yesterday, Sarah cornered me in the kitchen and blamed me for destroying her marriage. She said I'd poisoned Mike against Emma and that my jealousy had torn apart their family. She said if I didn't move out by the end of the month, she'd start eviction proceedings against me. Emma watched this confrontation with obvious satisfaction. After Sarah left the room, Emma smiled at me. She said she'd warned me about what would happen if I kept causing problems. She said she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. Daniel was gone, Mike was gone, and soon I'd be gone too. I realized then that Emma's behavior wasn't just inappropriate flirtation. It was a deliberate campaign to destroy my support system and isolate me. She'd successfully manipulated the situation to turn Sarah against me and drive away both Daniel and Mike. I'm currently looking for apartments and plan to move out within the next 2 weeks. Daniel and I are still together, but the stress has definitely affected our relationship. Mike has asked me to keep in touch and says he's he's considering divorce, depending on whether Sarah is willing to acknowledge Emma's problems. I don't know what will happen to this family, but I know I can't be part of it anymore. Emma has shown me exactly who she is, and Sarah has chosen to enable her rather than protect the people Emma hurts. I'm done being collateral damage in their dysfunction. Our update 3. This will be my final update on this situation. I've moved out of Sarah and Mike's house. While I'm still processing everything that happened, I wanted to provide closure on how things ended. I found a small apartment across town and moved out 3 weeks ago. Daniel helped me pack and move my belongings. Having him there for support made the process easier. Sarah barely spoke to me during the move, while Emma watched from her bedroom window with what I can only describe as triumph. Mike came by on moving day to say goodbye privately. He looked tired and older than I remembered, but he seemed relieved that I was getting out of the toxic situation. He gave me his new address and phone number, explaining that he'd filed for separation from Sarah the week before. Mike told me that after our conversation about Emma's pattern of behavior, he'd done some investigating of his own. He'd spoken with several family friends and discovered that Emma's inappropriate conduct had been an open secret for years. Multiple people had stopped inviting Sarah and Emma to social gatherings because of Emma's behavior toward their husbands and sons. He'd also learned that Emma had been expelled from 2 different part-time jobs for sexual harassment of male coworkers and supervisors. Sarah had convinced him each time that Emma was being unfairly targeted by jealous women, but now he realized the pattern was undeniable. When Mike presented this information to Sarah, she'd become defensive and accused him of conspiring against their daughter. She'd insisted that everyone was lying because they were jealous of Emma's beauty and confidence. The conversation had ended with Sarah demanding that Mike choose between her and his accusations against Emma. Mike chose to leave rather than continue enabling Emma's behavior and Sarah's denial. He said watching what happened to me and Daniel had been the final wake-up call he needed about his family's dysfunction. 2 weeks after I moved out, I received an unexpected phone call from Sarah's sister Lisa. She had been at the dinner where Emma cornered Daniel. Lisa said she needed to tell me something that had been bothering her since that night. Lisa explained that she'd gone looking for the bathroom during dinner and had seen Emma's interaction with Daniel in the hallway. She'd witnessed Emma touching Daniel inappropriately and heard her making explicit suggestions. Lisa said she'd been shocked by Emma's behavior but hadn't known how to address it at the time. Lisa apologized for not speaking up sooner and said she called Sarah to tell her what she'd seen. According to Lisa, Sarah had accused her of lying to protect me and had hung up on her. Lisa said she'd decided to call me directly because she couldn't let me think I was crazy or that I'd imagined Emma's behavior. Lisa also revealed that she'd stopped including Emma in family gatherings with her sons. Emma had made inappropriate comments and advances toward both of her 20-year-old twins during previous visits. She said other family members had similar stories, but that Sarah always dismissed their concerns as jealousy or misunderstanding. This conversation was validating but also heartbreaking. I realized that Emma had been causing problems throughout the extended family for years, and Sarah's enabling had allowed the behavior to continue and escalate. Last week, I ran into Kevin, Mike's brother, who had visited during the final weeks I lived there. Kevin approached me at a coffee shop and asked if we could talk. I was hesitant, given his inappropriate response to Emma's behavior, but I was curious about his perspective. Kevin told me that Emma had contacted him several times since his visit, sending photos and messages that were clearly inappropriate. He'd initially enjoyed the attention, but Emma's pursuit had become increasingly aggressive and uncomfortable. She'd started showing up at his hotel uninvited and had even followed him to job interviews. Kevin said he'd finally had to block Emma's number and social media accounts because her behavior had become stalking. He'd also called Mike to warn him about Emma's escalation, which had contributed to Mike's decision to leave Sarah. Kevin apologized for his initial response to Emma's behavior. He said he hadn't realized how it would affect me and my living situation. He said Emma had told him that I was jealous and controlling, and he'd believed her at first. Seeing her behavior toward him afterward had made him understand what Daniel and I had been dealing with. Daniel and I are doing well, though the experience has definitely affected our relationship. We've had to work through trust issues, not between us, but in terms of trusting our judgment about other people's motives. The experience taught us both that we need to address problems directly, rather than hoping they'll resolve themselves. Daniel has been incredibly supportive throughout this process, and our relationship is stronger now than it was before everything happened. We've talked about moving in together once my lease is up, and we're both excited about having our own space without family drama. Mike and I stay in touch regularly. He's moved into his own apartment and is proceeding with divorce from Sarah. He says Sarah continues to deny that Emma has any problems and blames him for abandoning his family. Emma, according to Mike, has moved on to pursuing new targets now that Daniel and Kevin are unavailable. Mike has expressed regret about not believing me sooner and has apologized multiple times for letting the situation escalate as far as it did. He's also offered to write a character reference for me if I ever need one, acknowledging that I was telling the truth about Emma's behavior from the beginning. I haven't heard from Sarah or Emma since moving out, which is probably for the best. I occasionally hear updates through Mike or other family members, but I'm not seeking direct contact with either of them. The hardest part of this experience has been accepting that the family I thought I had was not what I believed it to be. People who took me in after my parents died and supported me through college, Sarah's willingness to sacrifice my well-being to protect Emma's behavior showed me something important. My place in their family was conditional and fragile, but I've also learned that real family isn't necessarily about blood relationships. Mike's support during this difficult time, despite it costing him his marriage, showed me what genuine care looks like. Daniel's loyalty and understanding throughout the situation proved that our relationship can withstand external pressure. I'm in a better place now, both literally and emotionally. My apartment is small but peaceful. My relationship with Daniel is solid. I'm no longer walking on eggshells trying to manage someone else's inappropriate inappropriate behavior. I'm also saving money without the stress of family drama affecting my work performance. For anyone dealing with similar situations, my advice is to trust your instincts and document what you observe. Don't let people gaslight you into thinking you're imagining inappropriate behavior, even if those people are family members who claim to care about you. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones enabling the problem. I'm closing this chapter of my life and focusing on building healthier relationships going forward. Thank you to everyone who offered support and advice during this difficult time.